But thank you, and good afternoon, morning, and evening from wherever you are. So I'm very pleased to introduce the speakers of the next session. So our first speaker is Nick Meade, who is Director of Policy at Genetic Alliance UK, which is the national charity working for genetic, rare and undiagnosed conditions in the UK. It's an alliance of around 200 patient organizations, and Nick leads the work which focuses on the commissioning of healthcare services and access to therapies, on genetic testing, genomic technologies, and on reproductive choice. So Nick will present to us the work done with Genetic Alliance patient community on their views of genome editing.
Thank you, Nick. You can present.
Thanks very much, Virginie, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak here today. Virginie's saved me a second or two on describing the organization I work for. We have more than 200 patient organization members in the UK supporting people living with rare and genetic conditions, and we run the Rare Disease UK campaign, which works closely with Eurordis. I want to start just by acknowledging all the people that have helped us with our work on genome editing. Certainly all the people living with rare and genetic conditions that have contributed to our work, but also to Virginie herself for working with us on our policy work in this area, and to the Progress Educational Trust to collaborate with us closely on this topic. So today I'm aiming to share a little bit more about our community, talk about unmet health need in that community and how that affects our attitudes to medical innovation and therefore genome editing. I'm going to talk a bit about findings from two of our projects on that have engaged our community in the topic of genome editing. And then I'm going to reflect a little bit on learnings from broader policy work that our organization has done that might reflect back on genome editing. So despite the political environment, the UK still follows the EU definition of a rare condition, affecting fewer than 5 in 10,000 people. And almost every single gene condition is rare. So the OrphaNet database shows us how many rare conditions there are that have been named and understood. That number's over 6,000 now. Around 70% are genetic and around 70% are exclusively pediatric in their onset. There's an amazing spectrum of in all types of attribute to rare conditions and how they bring challenges to the people they affect. But there are some patterns. One is certainly around how difficult it is to get a diagnosis, but also, and most pertinent to our topic today, is that there are very few treatments for people with rare conditions. Treatment at the moment for most conditions is trying to limit the progress of the condition. And then there's lots of other challenges that our community face, and they bring their own challenges around working, learning, and some of those challenges lead to mental health challenges too. So just to expand a little bit more about unmet health need here. So this is a graph from the URDIC, who have been trying to amplify research and progress towards new medicines for rare conditions. They have this graph that charts new medicines since 2010. These numbers are cumulative, and you can see that we've gone from very few to almost 400. So these are indications, not medicines, and that it combines Europe and America's regulatory figures. Just as an indication of progress, I know it's an artifact, but it's interesting to note that in this same time period, the number of rare conditions that we've understood has grown faster than the number of medicines we've managed to gather. And of course, there are other treatments that aren't medical, such as bone marrow transplantation, and adjusting diet to cope with metabolic conditions. But for most of these medicines and those treatment I just mentioned, the burden on our community very high, and these treatments don't usually end up with people living normal lives. So this atmosphere affects the attitudes of our community towards many topics in health. And of course, these are at a population level. There are lots of individuals with their own views, but in general, people living with rare and genetic conditions have a more permissive attitude towards things that might help progress towards meeting this unmet health need. And that includes sharing data, the use of animals to facilitate research, attitudes towards reproductive choice, and some of the new, so mitochondrial replacement therapy is a reproductive choice technique that has been in the media an awful lot in the UK, and also their attitudes towards innovative medicines. And all of that comes with the caveat that this is in the context of high quality, secure, and appropriate ethically managed research. This attitude comes from the drive that our community has to leave no stone unturned in the search for cures and treatments for rare conditions, and any means to take control of how the conditions affect our community. It's very important to note that genome editing is the topic of our meeting today, but it's certainly not the only avenue that our community wants explored. And they don't see genome editing as a single beacon for the future. There are other opportunities too. So to move on to some of our engagement activities here, the bottom line is pretty simple, that we're strongly in support of exploring the possibilities of genome editing. And here are just a couple of quotes. One participant in our work in 2016 said, "I feel any person with a life-changing or life-limiting condition should be given the chance of a normal life." And that they would be very pleased to participate in research. The views from a year later on what genome editing might achieve reflects the broad potential here, that we can learn more, we can accelerate research, and hopefully make progress. There is some wariness from having been participating in progress in the past, and one of the participants was essentially giving the message that he's been told many times over his life that he's a few years away for a treatment for his condition, thalassemia, and those claims haven't always come good. So our first piece of work was in November 2016, and the community, as I've said, are very broadly supportive here. I'll just pick out a few key points here. That this message came after a series of educational webinars, and one of the messages was that the community wanted to learn more. So there's a drive for information, and I think the research community that know most about this are the best to feed more information to the patient community. There was a topic on human enhancement, and unsurprisingly, the patient community was strongly in favor of focusing on unmet health need. Interestingly, the community wanted to be able to participate in the regulation of this technology and future technologies, and that matches our attitude towards many healthcare decisions. So our second piece of work was even more in depth, with a series of 5 workshops engaging people affected by genetic conditions and people from the fertility sector as well. There were 2 products from this, a cohort of the community who became much more informed about genome editing and went on to speak at various events across Europe on the topic. And that really materially improved patient engagement in genome editing. I believe one of our participants spoke at a very early ARRIGE event, in fact. We also published a report that made recommendations aimed at ensuring the clarity of communication about genome editing. And that report was targeted at those that might in future engage the community. I don't have time to go into all the recommendations we made, but I just wanted to touch on the rationale for taking this approach to the work. That if we can be clear about what we're talking about when we talk about big steps forward in innovation that bring their own ethical debates or quandaries that need discussing with the community they affect, then definition is very important to make sure that we all understand what we're talking about and work towards common ground. In previous work for Genetic Alliance UK, I've seen definition be a major problem around big data and personalized medicine. They've all taken different names at different points in their in the long-running debates around these topics, and I haven't felt that a clear definition's ever really been available. And I've seen panels where every panelist has a different definition of those topics. Genome editing is a really broad topic with lots of potential uses, lots of potential approaches to delivering the benefits that it can bring. And we really do need to empower the public to have a say by being clear about what we're talking about when we talk about genome editing. And essentially, a naive patient view isn't very useful here. The more informed the patient is, the better they can contribute to discussion on this topic. So I'll just wind up by talking through a few things that have cropped up in my broader work that we see coming up in discussions around genome editing. So where there's been ethical discussions around genome editing, I've been surprised to see how much equity of access has been a topic here. And I've seen calls that genome editing only be available if it's available to all. And that's a laudable aim that I absolutely agree with. But it feels like we shouldn't let ourselves be held back by that aim, given the fact that there's inequity across essentially all forms of healthcare access internationally and within nations and between communities and so on. And I've listed a few examples of inequity in access to healthcare provision in the UK, reproductive choice between different conditions, even access to the same medicine between different patient communities is inequitable in the UK and I presume in other areas of the world. We've seen calls for access to be controlled around the seriousness of a condition. And I just flag the warning here that seriousness is a subjective label, and one man's condition that is easy to handle could, for many reasons, be very challenging for another family. And we need to be very careful about how we draw lines in spectrums and be careful about the consequences of drawing lines in those ways. So seriousness is actually one of the criteria for controlling access to reproductive choice in the UK. And pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is permitted for more than 1,000 genetic conditions in the UK now. All of them have been judged serious in that regulatory process. Now we've seen a lot of ethical concern and debate, and justly so, around genome editing in the germline. And that's right that we have that discussion, absolutely. But we should learn from the fact that a lot of the deliverables that could come from germline genome editing have already been discussed and managed successfully. So most of the reproductive choice opportunities from genome editing are already delivered through pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And the challenge of introducing genetic material has been covered as well through mitochondrial replacement therapy. And I want to finish just by saying, emphasizing the importance of the patient community in all health debates. And I think most where innovation is happening quickest and is taking greatest steps towards progress, that our community are the ones that benefit most from innovation. And we're also one of the communities that take greatest risks in terms of helping innovation drive forward. So I just finished by emphasizing the importance of engaging the patient community, carers and their families in making sure they're participating in these kind of discussions. And I think, therefore, I'm very grateful to be able to speak here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was a great presentation and very interesting. So I don't know if people have questions for Nick, but I've got a couple. Because it was quite a short presentation, I guess in the sake of time, you didn't really have time to detail the recommendation that you developed following the work that you did with your community. So I wondered if you had to pick a few, maybe in order of priority based on the interest of the audience that we have, which one would it be, and maybe why you think those are particularly important for the audience? You can't unmute.
Nick, we have to reactivate Nick. Yes. Now you can reactivate.
Thank you. I felt very trapped there. So I guess there are 8 recommendations from our report. I think I'd start by picking one, which I mean is so amazingly obvious, but didn't actually came as a bit of a surprise to us, that if you're trying to describe genome editing, a lot of your focus to a naive audience needs to be on ensuring they know what a genome is, because the word editing is used quite a lot and people understand what that is. But actually, to understand the potential of genome editing, to focus a significant portion of what you're talking about on what the genome is and why that's important to try to actually achieve the purpose of genome editing. Another important one is on using the term genome editing exclusively. So there are lots of synonyms to genome editing, genetic modification, genome engineering, gene editing, and so on. We picked genome editing over gene editing because you can edit more than one gene, and genome editing would cover one or more. And then just stick to that, because though one might become bored at using the term, it is much easier to understand if you're trying to learn, if people use the same term again and again. And not to use things like CRISPR, because CRISPR might not be the tool that we're using forever. When that becomes obsolete, then we don't want to have to start teaching everyone something new straight, as soon as we start using a different tool, we want to keep the learning that we've had. And so if we stick to genome editing as a name, then that will be helpful. Are you trapped now, Virginie, on mute?
Okay.
Okay, I think I'm good now. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, no, that does make sense. And I also just wanted to maybe insist on the point that you made a couple of times, that you can't approach people cold. And by that, I mean, like you say, the naive patient or citizens, even, and asking them what their views or their opinions are on genome editing. So it's really important to explain, to have the same understanding, as you mentioned, on the terms and the concept and the potential impact, so people can really contribute to the discussion, starting at the same level of understanding. Because if you do approach or consult the patient community or even the public, maybe those will be different perspectives, obviously, but without any kind of explanation, then the latest thing that they read in maybe a not even specialized kind of newspaper might just stuck with them, and that's going to forge their opinion if they don't have the basic kind of understanding of what all the different components to understand what genome editing is and what it could potentially do as well.
Absolutely. I wish I'd said it as eloquently as that, Virginie.
Right.
Virginie, you have a question from Jennifer. Jennifer, you can ask yourself.
You might have to unmute Jennifer, I guess.
No, Jennifer can unmute herself.
Of course.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Nick, for your presentation. Do you exchange with disabled groups, patient groups, disabled associations, disability rights groups, who argue against genetic modification because they underline that these practices will stigmatize them or will stigmatize them? I was just curious to know if you exchanged with them.
Yeah, so I mean, we that disability rights argument that, and it's especially around reproductive choice, so around germline use of genome editing. Yeah, we have proponents of that argument in the UK. Certainly, it's definitely not a majority viewpoint of our community of 200 patient organizations supporting those living with rare and genetic conditions. And I think the engagement of that community in reproductive choice activity is a brilliant example of how a pro-choice attitude is the best way out of this debate, where we can put the opportunities on the table for people to make individual or couple-based reproductive choice decisions without judging which way people choose to go, and make sure that information is available for people to take that choice, and pick the option that's most appropriate to them. The communities we represent all are focused, or mostly are all focused on the day-to-day care of people living with rare and genetic conditions. So they're spending their lives with people affected by these conditions who are living with them and are helping them deal with the challenges that those conditions pose. So while we have a majority of membership that support reproductive choice, you can see that the availability of reproductive choice and attitude that's positive towards reproductive choice isn't contrary towards believing that people affected by a disability should have a rich and full life and have as much to contribute to society as any other individual in society.
Thank you, Nick. I agree with your response and with the work that Eurordis did as well to a smaller scale, because we only had one workshop with patient representative from European federations on specific rare disease or national alliances, so on all type of rare disease. And even within that kind of community, we did, you know, also have a bit of a debate around that. And yeah, opinions and perspectives vary. You cannot have one, you know, I know we say, you know, one voice for the patient community, but on those issues, you have to respect people's preferences, and based on your life, on your story, it's going to change. So that's, again, yes, the pro-choice attitude is the one that we have to go on. But I think for that to still be a possibility, maybe in the future, we do have to educate the public as well, because they are the one that sometimes, you know, have that look on other people and maybe might judge other people's choices. So we do need to educate the public at large, I think, so that that choice can be respected in the future. I have another question, but I think
yes, Virginie.
Yes.
Yes, I can read the question from Milen.
Okay.
The problem of acceptance when you are in need and have innovation therapies as only hope puts a bias on the acceptance of the therapy by the general public. Do you think the equilibrium between change and choice is altered in this situation? It works only in terms of a bottom-up approach, but does not respond to general perspective, or does it? Thank you anyway for your research.
I'm not convinced. Sorry, I'm not sure I follow the question, but I just offer the view that there's a spectrum in views between the public and people with the most serious challenges from disease, whether they be rare or not. And I mean, that spectrum is not two-dimensional. And I mean, I think if you look more into the population, you'll see quite a lot of heterogeneity in the attitudes people have towards innovation in different dimensions, but I'm not sure I'm answering the question.
I don't know
have a
if
view on that one, Viriginie?
Francois has a question.
Hello, Nick. It's maybe a quick question. You have presented various ways to engage patients group, like focus groups or opinion papers that you published. But have you developed also the means to assess the impact of all these activities that you have developing? You have developed, sorry.
I stuck. Yeah. He needs to be unmuted, I think, Louis. Nick would like to respond.
It's okay.
Sorry, it's the learned response in Zoom meetings is to mute when you stop talking. So we have seen our report covered and picked up around the world. Our organization hasn't done as much work on validating the impact of our work as the Progress Educational Trust have in looking at the impact of our findings. I've just got anecdotal responses that I've met people who have thanked us for the report, and that has got to them through organic pathways. When our site went down for a while, an academic at University of Berkeley got in touch because it was a resource for their teaching program. So we're seeing that it's reached globally, and that's thanks to some learned societies disseminating our report themselves. So we've been pleased with the impact.
All right. I think we have to close and we have to break. So, or maybe did you have a last minute question? There is a last minute.
I did, but he would deserve a bit more time. So it's fine, I think.
Okay. So then,
Nick,
thank you, Virginie, and thank you, Nick. I apologize again for the video of Gaetan. Gaetan's video will be uploaded into the ARRIGE YouTube channel, so you will be able. So we now have a pause. We have a break of 15 minutes, 1-5. In 1-5, we are back again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Virginie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.